So what I always tell my people, both the people are reporting to me, but also any colleagues that I'm mentoring, any peers that I'm mentoring, try to make sure that you're really...
Let's do it. Giovanni, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Joe. Happy to be here.
So today we're going to focus on working with really senior stakeholders as talent professionals, right? Something you've done as head of talent now at Statista and in your leadership roles before at Delivery Hero and Zalando. So where should we start? What would you focus on in terms of prep work when you're kicking off with a senior stakeholder for the first time?
Great question, Joe. I think it's very, very important to know the business, right? Especially if you're partnering with let's say a senior director or a VP or a C-level. You do not want to go into the meeting without being properly informed about what's going on in the business, right? Of course, you're not expected to have the same depth in terms of knowledge of what they have, but you should definitely know the area you're recruiting for very well. And my personal recommendation is, if you are a recruiter and you plan, let's really throw in a concrete case. You want to launch a senior director of performance marketing with the chief marketing officer. And something that could be very useful would be having maybe multiple conversations beforehand with the people reporting into this person, or the people reporting into the people reporting to this person. So you can at least, get a sense of the team life, of the tools, of the projects they're working on, and just get to the call more prepared.
Let's talk about extending that relationship then. One thing we talk about often is you want to build trust of your stakeholders, which sounds great. I think everyone wants to build trust, right? But practically, how can you do that? And I'd love to actually kick off with one of your quotes from one of your articles, because I think it's excellent. The quote was, "You cannot ask for accountability if you don't champion it yourself." I think that's excellent. So maybe we start there, and what other tips do you have on building trust?
First of all, Joe, it's lovely that you quote me. I feel very flattered by that. Thank you. That's my motto, actually. I mean, we hear many colleagues of ours complaining about not getting enough attention or response from the stakeholders, or I don't know, they didn't review the code challenge on time. They should have done this. They should have done that. Fair. Sometimes it is fair, right? But at the same time, if we do not offer that level of accountability ourselves, we cannot expect it from them, right? So what I always tell my people, both the people are reporting to me, but also any colleagues that I'm mentoring, any peers that I'm mentoring, try to make sure that you're really always on point, right? That you have your prep work ready. A piece of advice that I always give, for example, to people that are kicking off senior role with a senior stakeholder is a little bit like in sales, I guess, right? Offering more than what you asked, over offering. You're supposed to launch, let's say, a VP of international expansion. Great. Make sure that you search for those profiles on LinkedIn, collect maybe 15 to 25 profiles that you want to calibrate with them. And that's already a great way to show proactivity, accountability, just willingness to understand their needs and start a great collaboration.
Do you have any tips specifically on time? So I've got two areas here, and let's start off with in the meeting. So, maybe with a mid-level manager, you might have 1 hour to do the kickoff and intake, which is amazing, right? There's so much detail you can get in there. Maybe with a senior stakeholder, let's say they only have 15, 30 minutes. How can you impress and build trust in a much shorter period of direct time with a stakeholder?
That's a very good one, Joe. I think, first of all, maybe you cannot necessarily impress them before the meeting, but after the meeting, just by taking note of whatever they say and all of the conversation and sending out a really structured recap of what you went through. Also with a nice action plan, ideally also with a forecast. So I don't know, within 10 days, I'm expected to collect such amount of profiles, to have such amount of, interviews, and we will then circle back on that. So I think showing them structure and really, as I said before, willingness to understand what their struggles are and what their needs are is absolutely important. Also, I think something absolutely good to impress them. I don't even want to say to impress them, but just to make sure that you can work really properly with them. We know that their schedule might be crazy, right? So, of course, you don't often have the privilege to just, pick a free slot and book in a call for them. But make sure that you develop also a strong relationship with their assistant, for example, if they have one, chief of staff, executive assistant, whoever, someone who could ideally share with you, I don't know, a set of placeholders that you can then fill with calls with candidates that you consider good. That's a nice technique that I have learned so far.
Awesome. Yeah, I think it's a big thing, right? They're going to have competing priorities and quite big
Right.
business priorities that they have to focus on, of which hiring is just one of them. So it can be quite a difficult thing to balance. Are there any other things like more outside of the initial call where you've got limited time? Any things which optimize the process on an ongoing basis?
Sure. I would definitely suggest keep your communication to the point, concise, brief. I mean, we notice that also. I'm noticing that now, right? So now that I'm in contact with more senior stakeholders due to the nature of my job, you do see that many of them really write super concise emails, right? And sometimes you may even think, depends on the fact that they want to show, their position of power, but actually it's really due to limited time. And they also have limited time to read. So make sure that you really, send across your message in a really nice but concise way. And that's already a very winning tip, in my opinion. Tip that I would give every recruiter to make the collaboration with senior stakeholders really smooth is proactively send them updates. Right? Maybe they haven't even asked you to share, I don't know, weekly or bi-weekly updates, but it's really on you to, I don't know, at the end of the week, just say, hey, Joe, Sarah, these are the data around the position we are working on. The pass-through rate is, drop-off rate is. That's what I would suggest.
I think it's a good tip. Like when we think about writing outreach for candidates, right? Every word in that outreach message has to fight for its life. Versus when we do internal updates, I think we're all guilty of getting a bit wordy and conversational at times. Whereas if you can be really succinct, it shows you actually understand something deeply. And maybe there is wider context and you can give them a link if they want to drill down into the wider context. But I think it needs to be digestible for these super busy folks, right? So yeah, love that tip. One thing I think is a common challenge, and I'd love your thoughts on this because I think there's competing answers, right? And this is about sticking to process or making it easy for a senior stakeholder. And I'll explain what I mean with an example. Um, let's say the ATS, I think this is a common frustration. Maybe the senior manager doesn't go into the ATS and put their feedback in either because they don't know how to, haven't spent the time how to, or it's too time consuming for their schedule and the amount of interviews they're doing. How do you balance between following the process, which is getting the manager to complete the ATS, versus making it easier for them and enabling them and maybe doing it via Slack and then doing that work yourself? So what's your thoughts on that scenario?
Joe, you are touching a nerve here. No, jokes aside, it's all about compromising. I know that we, let's say TA people, should really push ourselves and everybody else towards operational excellence, right? It's in the nature of our job. We also want to make sure that data always look clean, that all the scorecards, post-interview scorecards are submitted. But in these cases, we need to be pragmatic, in my opinion, right? So it is okay if there is no 100%, let's say, compliance or correctness, as long as we, let's say, go together towards the same goal, right? Something that has helped me so far. I mean, we also have to understand that not all of the senior stakeholders are particularly tech savvy, for example. And therefore, or they're just, as I said before, they just have an absolutely limited amount of time. Google Sheets, Excel, these kind of tools are always of big help, right? So especially if you notice that they are a little bit old school and they like to work that way, just make sure that you come up with a nice document where you can store everything. And let's say that let's imagine that they don't submit scorecards, but you do have a touch point with them. You have a conversation, you take notes, you store it there, and you're good to go. You have to be pragmatic, 100%.
Yeah, I think it's probably got to be one of the top three frustrations, right? Like people not filling out the scorecards or not completing the ATS.
It's
It's
true.
definitely up there. This podcast is brought to you by the Recruiting Wisdom newsletter. Every week, Recruiting Wisdom shares practical tips, tricks, and hacks directly from global talent acquisition leaders, helping you become a better recruiter in 10 minutes or less. Recruiting Wisdom is completely free to join, but the only way to receive every issue is to join the email list. The link is in the description below. On hiring manager experience, then, I want to know, how do you think about this tangibly? Is it something that you measure now or have measured in companies you're at before? And how do you know if you're providing a good hiring manager experience or if it's improving over time?
I would say surveys, right? So we often send out candidate experience surveys. We can do the same with hiring managers, of course, right? Um, I did it actually recently, and it's all really about preparing a set of I would say max to 5 questions, right? Really to the point, ideally with a score or sometimes even with an open question, but that's key, right? So that's sometimes you can even, of course, make it automatic through an ATS or anything like that. That's also a very good option. But yes, surveys are always, let's say, your best ally in that regard, I would say.
What specific things are you measuring? Like, what would be some example questions?
I'll just throw in a couple of random questions. Like, for example, are you satisfied with the first profile selection, with the initial profile selection? How would you rate the speed of the process? If actually an interesting one, but that opens up actually another completely different chapter, which is quality of hire, right? You could ideally combine it with an assessment of the profiles you've hired and how they have performed in the last, let's say, 6 months or something. That's also a good retrospective question to ask, I would say.
See, I think this might be a whole rabbit hole we can go down if is that the recruiter's responsibility or not, but I'm not sure if we have time right now.
Absolutely.
To finish off with then, any top tips if you're maybe someone who's new to working with senior stakeholders, maybe it's your first relationship of this kind, what would be your non-negotiables for someone doing that?
Maybe give you a little bit of an unconventional tip. You always have to remind yourself that no matter, let's say, how much the person you're speaking to earns or how much the person you're speaking to is high in the company hierarchy, still they're a human like yourself. As long as you speak clearly, respectfully, and you really, follow the process and set up, let's say, a good framework, you don't have anything to fear, right? I know that sounds very cheesy, maybe, but it's the truth. We always have to just remind ourselves that we're all, let's say, human, and therefore there's no need to be scared of the person we're speaking to. Yeah.
I think it's great advice. And one thing I'd maybe add from some other heads of TA I've spoke to is, yes, you may be coming into this relationship and they have more years experience and they might have hired loads of people into their teams. And of course, they're likely a domain expert. You are still the expert on hiring in that relationship. You're the person going out there, speaking to the candidates, understanding their sentiment, looking at the current market data, and you've got like the closest pulse versus the stakeholder who's likely actually quite far removed from that, especially if they're really senior. So this is something I've heard a lot of people say. You are an expert within the hiring part of this relationship and feel confident in that.
True. That's very true, Joe. And I think, of course, we are sometimes dealing with very seasoned stakeholders who are very strong in hiring, right? So they have worked maybe with within high performing organizations. They have even contributed to create, let's say, talent acquisition frameworks. So we have also to be respectful of that. But ultimately, we also know that some of them maybe join a company and they think they are just going to bring their own, let's say, solution, right? Whereas they also have to comply a little bit with what was prepared before, right? So it's important that no matter, let's say, how junior you are as a recruiter, you always you have to know that you always have the right to say, one moment, this is not how we do things here. So it's always a matter of compromising, of course.
Yeah, and I think as long as you come with data, if you're going to push back, if you have data to back it up and can explain it, then you're well within your rights to do that. We've focused quite a lot on positives and how to get the most out of these relationships. Let me flip that on its head. Where do you most often see these relationships go wrong? What do recruiters miss, which causes issues in these senior stakeholders?
I would say that it can go very wrong when a recruiter gets really anxious, right? If you are, let's say, if you think that you should just deliver as many profiles as possible, if you start going into that mindset, that could be really tricky because, yes, of course, you may get some profiles you send over rejected, right? But instead of thinking, okay, then I have to increase quantity of my delivery, then you should rather not hesitate to just say, hey, I'm sorry, maybe I haven't understood the profile we're looking for. Can we meet again, or can I meet again with some of the people reporting to you and try to get more insights? It's always better to candidly admit that you haven't really understood the role than getting trapped by anxious emotions and start to, because that can only make it worse. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's good advice. If you haven't, one metric I've seen people start to talk about a little bit more is time to alignment. And if you haven't reached absolute alignment with the hiring manager at the start and you go off and do a load of work, there's a really high chance that all of that work becomes irrelevant in a few weeks' time. So yeah, I think that's good advice. Even if it's a little bit painful up front to say we need to do this again or like we need to revisit that, it will pay you back in the months and weeks to come, right?
Definitely.
Awesome. Gio, love chatting with you as always. Thanks for joining me.
My pleasure, Joe. Thank you so much.